extent that Joe Biden is functioning at all, he's doing so in a make-believe world where the biggest gun problem we have in America is the sale of guns to straw purchasers.
5% of gun dealers, turns out, in the study we did, showed that 90% of illegal guns were found at the crime scenes sold by 5% of gun dealers. 5% sold 90% of the guns found at crime scenes.
Really, Mr. President? 5% of gun dealers sold 90% of the guns found at crime scenes? That's not only wrong, it doesn't make sense. Yes, absolutely go after straw purchasers, but the problem we have in America is with illegal guns not sold by gun dealers, but instead sold illegally on the streets. The biggest issue we have with guns in America is the use of illegal guns to kill and maim innocent victims. Yes, buying a gun from a dealer and then giving it to a prohibited purchaser is a crime. But the last time we had a significant amount of crime occurring through straw purchasers was when your pal, Barack Obama, ended up selling guns to straw purchasers who then took them to Mexico, then used by the cartels in the disastrous Fast and Furious calamity where a United States border agent was killed. You falsely claim that a ban on assault weapons and high-capacity magazines cuts crime.
Ban on assault weapons and high-capacity magazines. No one needs to have a weapon that can fire over 30, 40, 50, even up to 100 rounds, unless you think the deer are wearing Kevlar vests or something. Community policing and programs that keep neighborhoods safe and keep folks out of trouble. These efforts work, they save lives.
Joe, your assault on weapons ban claim is also just not true. A 2004 Department of Justice study concluded that the ban on assault weapons cannot be credited with a decrease in violence. Assault weapons are used in no more than 8% of gun crimes before the ban, and your assault weapons ban did not significantly reduce the murder rates at the state level. So stop patting yourself on the back with that one. And as for your claim that no one needs to have a weapon that can fire 30, 40, 50, or even 100 rounds unless you think deer are wearing Kevlar vests, first of all, you're not funny. Second, you're not lucid. And third, who says the Second Amendment is all about deer hunting? Leave Bambi out of this. People can have a gun for a variety of reasons, none of which are your business. The Second Amendment reads, a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. It does not read, a well-regulated deer population being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the hunter to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. The Supreme Court has ruled the Second Amendment protects the right of the individual to have and use guns for legal purposes. The right to bear arms vests in the individual, not merely a collective militia. And in the landmark case of D.C. versus Heller, the Supreme Court ruled all citizens are the militia and gun ownership is independent of membership in a militia or any kind of military unit. So stop acting as though deer hunting is the only reason people have guns. But your false statements continued through your press conference when you stated this.
The gun lobby wants you to believe that cities that are the toughest had the toughest gun laws still have the highest rates of gun violence. Don't believe it.
That also is a lie. Chicago, one of the cities you mentioned, has one of the toughest gun laws in the country. It is illegal to possess a gun there. And yet they have one of the highest gun crime rates in the country. Believe it. Joe, you want to know why gun crime is up and violent crime is up and why we're seeing murder and mayhem on our city streets like we haven't seen in decades? I'll tell you why. These high-crime cities are being run by Democrats who either don't have a clue or don't care about anyone but themselves. As in, let me keep my security, and you peons, you just fend for yourselves. And take, for example, Mila Wiley, running for mayor in New York City. She has security where she lives, but doesn't want it for anyone else. And then, Joe, you go on to say if anyone dares to go after the government, you're going to need more lethal weapons.
If you wanted to think you need to have weapons to take on the government, you need F-15s and maybe some nuclear weapons.
Is that a threat? What is that about? And you say, Joe, that the anti-gun policies are woefully underfunded. I don't know how you say this, but defunding the police and street crime units and defunding anti-crime units and denigrating cops and putting targets on the backs of cops is pretty much the response of your party that has gotten us into this mess. And now you're blaming cuts in law enforcement funding on COVID-19?
You know, they've not only had to fight this pandemic, they've also had to deal with economic crisis that has decimated their budgets.
Joe, you don't have a clue.
Police Chief Murray of the Police Chief Murphy, Paul of Baton Rouge, Louisiana, talked about how he's coordinating more closely with the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, the ATF, and the Federal Bureau of Investigation.
Why don't you practice the names before you start the press conference instead of lecturing us on gun issues? You can't even substantiate the claims you make. There is only one way to fight gun crime, and you obviously don't know what it is. Here's some clues. Get yourself some confidential informants, some undercover officers, search warrants, surveillance, wiretaps, probable cause. Start making some arrests. And make sure that your cops charge those crimes which require mandatory incarceration. And make sure that the state's attorney's office or the DAs prosecute those arrests. Make sure that judges follow the law and send them to jail. And stop lecturing us and blaming guns for the violence in America. The violence is caused by those who hate America, hate police, and hate law and order. Make no mistake. Not one of us law-abiding citizens is going to let you take away our guns or our ammo, no matter how much you lie to us. And that's my open. Let me know what you think on my Facebook and Twitter, #Judge Jeanine. And here with reaction to my open and to discuss this terrifying increase in violent crime across U.S. cities, Dallas Police Chief Eddie Garcia and the National Vice President for the Fraternal Order of Police, Sergeant Joe Grimaldi. All right, gentlemen, you know, Biden is touting his new crime strategy on assault weapons, and it doesn't appear, and I could be wrong, but I'll ask you, does it appear that he's on the right track to stop gun violence in the United States? I'll start with you, Chief Garcia.
Well, thank you for having me. And although I think I can speak for my colleagues in other major cities across America, we appreciate the fact that we've recognized that there's an increase in violent crime, and we're recognizing that we need to do something about it. And furthermore, in the messaging, recognizing that defunding and dismantling police departments is not the answer. However, although we do have an issue with weapons and illegally possessed weapons being possessed by criminals, committing harm on our cities, the data just simply doesn't back up the fact that guns are the simply only driver. We do a lot of work with criminologists here in the city of Dallas that we brought in to help us with our issues. And as they'll point out, when crime was at its peak in the 80s, there were many less weapons in circulation than there are today. There are many more weapons that are in circulation than there are today, and than there was when violence was at its peak in the 80s, since criminologists have been studying crime in America. And so simply stating that guns are the only driver...
Right. What do you think the driver is?
Well, it's really quite a combination of things. I mean, nationally, particularly because of dismantling, defunding combination, you have officer morale. Where honorable, respective officers have felt under siege, unappreciated, undervalued. They're human, and that impacts their work productivity. And so what's happened is we've lost proactive police engagement where we need it the most.
That's right.
Yes, we need to be more professional and
That's right.
better as an organization, but we've somewhat lost that.
Okay, I'll go to Joseph Grimaldi, Vice President of the National Fraternal Order of Police. Tell me what Biden said right and what he said wrong.
Well, I think it's important that he acknowledged that defunding the police is a complete loser, but yet we still have politicians in the media gaslighting the American public to believe that this is some sort of solution. And the fact of the matter is they're charlatans selling snake oil to the public. And I'll tell you where the president missed the mark. He didn't talk about rogue prosecutors and activist judges who continue this revolving door criminal justice system that we have. We have gang members who are shooting people getting probation. We have gang members that are out on 8 felony bonds and then they're getting another bond. These revolving door policies and bail reform have been an unmitigated disaster for our communities. And you compound that with the anti-police rhetoric and denigrating the hardworking men and women in law enforcement, and it's a recipe for disaster. And that's why you saw in 2020 we had over 20,000 homicides in the United States. That hasn't happened since the mid-90s. And then the cities that actually decided it was a good idea to defund the police, let's look at their numbers. Portland, their murders jumped by 137%. Minneapolis, remember them? Up 236%. Yep. New York up 48%. Philly 66%. And the list goes on and on. So we want to talk about zero tolerance. How about we have zero tolerance for the people who are shooting people in the face, and let's throw the book at them.
Yeah, well, and people who are shooting children, Chief Garcia, you know, what Joe is saying is absolutely the case. I mean, we've got an increase in the tolerance of hate toward police, tying police's hands behind their backs, putting a target on their backs. I mean, does Joe Biden think anybody believes what he's saying, that 90% of the crimes that are street crimes occur as a result of sales from 5% of gun sales? Gun sale purchasers? I mean, is that crazy? Does that number sound legit to you?
Well, I'll say, you know what, I'll say this, and I consider myself a street cop, and remember when I was on patrol.
Is that a legitimate number? Do you believe for 1 second what he said, that 90% of the crimes, the gun crimes that occur in America, occur as a result of those same guns being sold by 5% of the gun dealers? Is that a legitimate statistic? Well, yes or no?
Well, I don't know that data.
Come on, Chief.
It doesn't seem. Well, I don't know the data. It does not seem reasonable to me. But I haven't drilled down to those numbers. But no, it doesn't seem reasonable to me.
Nothing to drill. Okay, go ahead. What were you going to say?
All right, what I was going to say was, you know, we talk about the officers and feeling undervalued. We don't, you know what? Our officers have to answer 911 calls for service. But we can't force our officers to conduct investigative car stops or do the type of investigations needed that yield the types of drugs and weapons and other things possessed by criminals that are harming our communities. They will only do that if they feel appreciated and feel that they're going to be judged fairly in a crisis, and that they feel that procedural justice applies to them as well. What was said earlier with regards to the revolving door, there is a perception, true or not, nationally, and unfortunately there are many examples, and many of my colleagues will tell you, that violent criminals are not being held accountable. This leads to a thinking that in some way social controls are being lessened, which further erodes the morale of police officers and then emboldens the violent criminals to think that no one's watching. And that it ultimately affects our communities the most.
Well, and Joe Grimaldi, I mean, the chief is right. They are emboldened to believe that no one's watching. And even if they are watching, we're letting them out. I mean, we've got gang members out to kill again. We've got street thugs out to assault another person. I mean, it's just over and over. I mean, will somebody talk about bail reform? Is any of this going to happen, or are we just going to have to live with this and buy our own guns?
You know, I certainly hope that we continue to have discussions about how much of an unmitigated disaster this bail reform has been. And in fact, a study from the University of Utah showed that Cook County, which is Chicago, was a complete failure in their bail reform, and people were reoffending on violent crimes at over 50%. But the fact of the matter is, Judge, law enforcement in this country, the American police officer, delivered historic crime reductions over the last 2 decades. And we can do it again if we're willing to restore the rule of law, which means not letting off hundreds of people in New York who are rioting and looting a few months back. And if we prosecute violent crimes to the fullest extent of the law, and we embrace broken windows theories, we can do it again. But we need the funding, and we need the support from our community and our politicians.
Okay, and finally, Chief Garcia, if you could have just one thing in the next 15 seconds, what would that one thing be? Would it be to change the laws? Would it be funding? What would it be if you had a wish list?
If I had a wish list, I'd keep it simple. As we talk about the issues with guns, etc., if we could simply just hold the individuals that are illegally possessing weapons, that are criminals, that are hold those individuals accountable to the fullest extent possible, we certainly can move the needle.
Oh. Chief Garcia, Sergeant Joe Grimaldi, thank you so much for being with us on this topic that makes me crazy. Up next, Democrats are pushing their far-left agenda onto children. So how are parents fighting back? We've got the tape and Kayleigh McEnany next to react. Don't go away. That was a few parents getting into a speak out at a Loudoun County School Board meeting in Virginia before it quickly spiraled out of control this week. Over 250 local residents signed up to share their thoughts about critical race theory and new transgender policies in their children's schools. But most of them weren't even given the chance to speak. The school board shut down comments from the public after a former state senator brought up allegations that community members had organized a list of their conservative neighbors to harass and publicly shame. When some of the attendees refused to be silenced and comply with the school board's orders, the police even got involved. Joining me now to react to it all, outnumbered co-host and former White House Press Secretary Kayleigh McEnany. All right, Kayleigh, good to have you on Justice. You know, it seems that one of the things that parents should have a right to do would be to have some input into the education of their children, especially their little children. And here, 50 out of 250 parents were allowed to speak who wanted to speak. That means 80% weren't given a chance to speak. What is your take on all of this?
Yeah, they were silenced, Judge, silenced. All they wanted to do was come and voice their complaint. And you have the superintendent just declaring it an unlawful assembly when I guess she heard something that she didn't like. I mean, this is amazing. Teachers think that they have become parents. Superintendents and principals think that they have become parents. Look no further than the Dalton School in New York, where parents are paying $55,000 a year for their kids to go to school to be shown a cartoon, 6-year-olds, a cartoon where private parts are mentioned and self-pleasure to 6-year-olds, and they are paying for this garbage. And then you go over to Loudoun County and they can't even speak out. It's amazing.
Well, you know, they wanted to speak out on critical race theory and the transgender policies. And the amazing part of it is that these school board members are elected. It's almost as though, I mean, we saw it with some of the governors. They become totalitarian and they become dictators. They're not to be spoken to. And yet it seems that more and more, I think the public is understanding the need to get involved in school board elections as well as all of the local elections. Now, what do you know about the fact that these teachers shut down the meeting? Up to that point, all the parents seem to be in agreement. How could they shut down the meeting?
I guess they heard something they didn't like and just said, hey, this is an unlawful assembly. They declared it as such and then pushed the parents out of the room. And I mean, this comes on the heels of in Loudoun County. We know that teacher, Tanner Cross, was suspended for sharing his religious beliefs only to be reinstated by a judge. This comes after a Christian family said, I don't want my child to be a part of a transgender lesson. So they put this child in what resembled a broom closet as if he was being punished for not wanting to hear something that should be taught by parents, not by teachers. It's amazing. And Judge, let me just say this. There's a sea change in this country going on. I looked at a poll, a YouGov poll. Guess what is tied with the economy as the issue of most importance to voters? Political correctness. And race relations even exceeding that. There's a sea change, and you're going to see it in 2022 when Republicans prevail.
Well, clearly, I mean, the fact that you've got all these parents coming out to the school board meetings and the fact that they put an end to free speech at an organized school board meeting where parents had the right to speak. It is a scheduled school board meeting. They can't decide we're only going to hear from 20% and we don't want to hear any more of it. I mean, they should recall them. As far as I'm concerned, I would find out how to recall those that board and get started on a new board as quickly as possible. But in the end, I mean, this is reflective of what's going on nationally in the country. And you see that 2022 is a way of maybe righting the wrongs that we're experiencing?
Yes, I mean, the economy, Judge, is always the issue of most importance to voters. I mean, this time around, it's crime was number one, but tied with the economy. I mean, think about that. Tied with the economy is political correctness, because these cultural wedge issues, people see it. It affects their lives. It affects their kids. When their little daughter, I have a 1.5-year-old, if she was coming home to me and saying, I was just taught that I'm an oppressor because of the color of my skin, and the girl sitting next to me is oppressed because of the color of hers, this is a real personal issue, which is why, hey, I don't want my daughter going to private school or public school, but parochial school, because I'll tell you, those Catholic schools, they may be the last bastion here for these kids.
And the amazing part is they were open all during the pandemic. Kayleigh McEnany, thanks so much for being with us. All right. And just ahead, will yet another rogue judge's outrageous bail decision lead to more violence on our streets? A story you need to hear next. We've been warning you about the frightening trend of rogue judges making decisions that allow dangerous criminals back on our streets. This time, a tragedy out of Texas. A 17-year-old teen is dead, and the family outraged with the judge's decision to free the murder suspect on $100,000 bond just days after the killing. The suspect charged in the case, 18-year-old Omari Sykes, is reportedly an admitted gang member, and the murdered teen's family now fear for their own safety. Joining me now, Andy Kahn of Crime Stoppers Houston, who's also serving as a spokesman for the victim's family. Andy, thanks so much for being with us on Justice. We started this segment 3 weeks ago, and I think we're going to keep doing it. I'm tired of these rogue judges who are letting people out on bond. And this defendant was out on bond, killed a 17-year-old at a graduation party, and then gets bonded again?
Hey, I wish I can say it was an anomaly, but it's par for the course. I have now tracked 121 people who have been murdered by defendants released on multiple felony bonds, felony PR bonds, which is basically a fancy word for get out of jail free card, or bond forfeiture. Right. A majority of those, over 85, have occurred in 2020 and 2021. We are in the midst, not just in Harris County, but nationally, of what I call the ramifications of bond reform. We are in a bond pandemic, and people are paying the ultimate price for these decisions. That is, they're losing their life.
Well, clearly, Crime Stoppers, and I might add, when I was DA, I brought it to Westchester. I thought it was extremely important, and I commend you for your work with Crime Stoppers. But, the shame of all this is that bail, so-called reform, or bond reform, as you refer to it, is not reform at all. And it's not as though we came up with the idea of bail out of nowhere. It's in the Constitution. So it's not like it isn't a part of the foundation of our criminal justice system, making sure that people come back to court. But this isn't just having them come back, they're committing more crimes. Is there any movement, Andy, in Texas to try to repeal this alleged bail or bond reform?
There used to be an adage called one bond per customer. You were out on bond, you were charged with another crime, guess what? You weren't getting back out again. That's not happening anymore. We do have legislation. We're hopeful that during the special session that bond reform will get passed, because we desperately need it. Crime is up, ladies and gentlemen, and it's associated with bail. And you're delusional not to think the revolving door at the courthouse is playing a significant, if not a major role in the increased crime rates, not just in Houston, but nationally.
Well, I mean, if we're sending a message to criminals, if anything, it's that go right ahead, you can do it, and we'll let you out again. And then if you need to silence witnesses, go on out and do that too. And that is a problem that we've seen repeatedly.
There's got to be a point where you say enough is enough. I mean, we had a guy who's out on over 12 bonds. Most of them for aggravated robbery. And I'm sitting there going, why isn't the judge saying, you know what, son, this bond thing just ain't working out. It's not good for you because you keep getting arrested, and it's definitely not in the best interest of public safety. It simply defies logic to let offenders repeatedly out time and time again to do what they do best, and that's commit crimes. And people are paying the price for this. I dare any city to go do what we are doing in Houston, and that is keeping track of their citizens that were murdered by defendants released on more than one bond.
How is the family doing in this case, Andy?
They're frustrated.
Lost his son.
I mean, they're frustrated. I don't blame them. I mean, the guy's out on bond to begin with, then he's charged with murder, and then they're back out again and they're saying, oh, well, gee, we're going to keep him under house arrest. You and I both know that's as good as the words on a piece of paper. Nothing's going to stop them from reoffending again. They're of the opinion, I agree with it, that someone else is going to pay the price of this decision, and I don't think there's any ifs, ands, or buts.
Let's get... Andy, let's get to the name of the judge in this case. What is the name of the judge who bailed this kid?
It is the 248th District Court judge, and she's no stranger to the 121 on my list. I actually keep track of all the judges that have granted multiple bonds. Her name is Hillary Unger.
There she is. All right.
Let me tell you one more thing. Let me tell you one more thing before we cut off. You would think that of the 121 people now charged with murder after being released on multiple bonds, that would be the end of the story. 20 of those are actually back out on bond on the murder charge. Go figure that one out.
All right, guys, let's put the judge's picture up again. I want to make sure people know who she is. Let's get it up again. Judge Hillary Unger. An embarrassment to the people of Houston. Anyway, Andy Kahn, stay in touch. Thank you so much. And next, has liberal hypocrisy finally worn out its welcome in California? Tommy Lahr and Kim Klacik join me to sound off. Joins me along with Red Renaissance President Kim Klacik. Okay, guys, it's pretty hard to get 1.7 million signatures, and I think there was something like 43 of them wanted to take their name off, so they're well over the 1.5 million. What does it say to you, Tommy, about Gavin Newsom and what Republicans think of him?
Well, I'll tell you this, it's not just what Republicans think of him, it's what the state of California thinks of him, and that's evident by the 1.7 million signatures on his recall petition. Of course, he's going to label this a conspiracy theory. He's already said that he's tweeted out, groups that have said that these people are anti-vaxxers, they're Trump supporters, they're QAnon conspiracy theorists. At the end of the day, what we see is evident. The leadership in California has been failing for years under Gavin Newsom, but it became very apparent during the COVID lockdown and tyranny. So now Californians are speaking up. They want him out, and I am confident they're going to do it.
Well, and Kim, I don't think there's any question but that the recall effort is going to be it's a success. They're already recalling him. But what's going to be the upshot of all this? How does it play out?
Yeah, well, first of all, thank you so much for having me, Judge. I think it's going to play out well for Republicans, honestly. We see a lot of candidates that have already thrown their hat in the ring. Like Tommy was saying, this shows how upset the state of California is. We saw during the lockdowns where he wasn't following all his rules. It was rules for thee, but not for me. And I think people are going to stand up. I remember specifically seeing a restaurant owner come out and talk about the fact that she did everything she possibly could to make sure she was, within regulations and opening outside seating, and then he moved the goalpost once again, and they already spent so much money on doing just what he said earlier. So I think now people are going to maybe wake up a little bit and think and consider maybe voting a little more conservative this time around.
All right, let's move on to another Democrat. We've got Senator Sheldon Whitehouse reveals that he belongs to a couple of clubs that lack diversity, and he doesn't seem to be too concerned about it, Tommy, does he?
No, absolutely not. And what's more concerning is the fact that Democrats and the activist community are not concerned with it. This is the same treatment that they gave Hunter Biden, or I should say lack of treatment that they gave Hunter Biden over his text messages that contain the N-word. This just goes to show all this activism, all this faux wokeness, it only has to do when it concerns conservatives or independents. But if you play for the Democrats, you are shielded every single time. They don't care about racism, they don't care about bigotry, they don't care about intolerance, so long as you play for their team. And that's evident time and time again. It's a pattern.
It is. It's a sad commentary. It really is, Kim. What say you?
Yeah, I'm not the one to tell private businesses what they should do, who they can include or not include, but here's the part when it comes to Senator Whitehouse. He is a hypocrite for belonging to these clubs, because as we see him talking on Capitol Hill all the time with the virtue signaling statements that he gives about George Floyd or Breonna Taylor and how inclusive, being inclusive is so important, and he's doing the exact opposite in his private life. And so again, Democrats,
Exactly.
Rules for thee, but not for me.
All right, there's something I want you to hear. This is President Biden the other day talking about Latinx. It rhymes with Kleenex. Take a listen to this.
It's awful hard as well to get Latinx vaccinated as well. Why? They're worried that they'll be vaccinated and deported.
All right, Tommy, Latinx are worried they'll be vaccinated and deported as if all Latinas, Latinx, are illegals. What say you, Tommy?
This isn't the first time he said something like that. He always seems to categorize people into a monolithic way of thinking. But, also he thinks that African Americans aren't able to get voter IDs. Now he thinks that those in the Hispanic community are not able to get vaccinated because they fear deportation. Obviously, the man is slipping. He is unwell. But the pattern of his rhetoric is pretty evident and pretty clear how he feels about